Oh my goodness. Hey, Wesley. I don't know if you can see or hear me, but we're going to start really soon. So what I'm going to do is just pretty much go live right now, if that's okay with you. And then we'll go from there. Hey, awesome. Yeah, so I guess, hey, I'll just give you some really quick context before we start. So basically, there's almost 600 startups attending.
Yep.
So you're not going to see them here. They're going to be tuning in on Umbrella. And I'm going to copy paste the questions into the comment section or the chat section here. You don't have to answer any of them. It's just if you feel like they're relevant or something, or if you have time, then that's great. And so we'll go from there. But yeah, so I'm going to quickly do two things logistically. I'm going to make an announcement right now. So I'm
Yep.
sending the announcement, and then I'm going to turn on the stream, and that means we're going to go live. So are you ready? Everything good on your end?
Yeah, I kept it pretty short for the slides, and I feel like because I wanted to ask you real quick because I think this is pretty much on theme, but I mainly wanted to just make it more like anecdotal around startup experiences I've been through and what I did to drive sales in each of those experiences, and then kind of leave it open after maybe 15, 20 minutes for open Q&A after that. And I started
Yep.
with a few questions to kind of goose everyone, but then let everyone chime in.
Yep, that's perfect. Okay, let's do that.
Cool.
Okay, so let's go live right now. Okay, and we are live. So hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Sloan Boston Alumni Association Startup Week. We're really excited to have a really special guest today, Wesley Barrow from Correlation Ventures. And it was interesting because I was talking to Wesley about maybe a month ago is when we met. And you know, on top of being a VC, Wesley, you're a fantastic salesperson. And I was like, wait a second, sales is like the number one thing that's on my mind all the time. And I'm sure other startups feel the same way. How do you sell a product before it's even ready? How do you sell your startup to someone when, you know, these are early beta testers, and how do you set their own expectations? How do you close a deal? Things that I am still to this day very much wondering about. And so we were like, well, might as well, it would be great if you could just come on and talk to all of our startups in the community and give us a sense of what it looks like, not just from the startup angle, but also even from the VC angle, on kind of what do venture capitalists look for on that front, on the sales side, and is it okay to not have any sales, or, what kind of expectations to look for there. So yeah, what I'm going to be doing is I'll pass it over to you, Wesley, and let you go for it. So welcome.
Cool. Alrighty. Thanks, Christina. I appreciate everyone's time today. And I did prepare a few slides just to kickstart the conversation. And so let me put this into the screen share here real quickly. Let's see here. All right, let's see. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to make this much more anecdotal because I've been through quite a few experiences as it relates to early selling at various startups. So I thought I'd start with a quick bio on myself. I have been based in New York for the last 12 years and previously had a few stints in San Francisco and LA, as well as my time after Penn undergrad in Philly. And when I got to New York, that was really the beginning of my sales career. I had started at a company back in 2010 called Buddy Media, which was a social marketing platform that ended up getting acquired by Salesforce. And before I started Buddy Media, I'd never been in a sales role in my entire life and was scared to death. And I'll show you a couple of the ways that I figured out how to get a quick start and kind of never look back. But after Buddy sold, I ended up starting my own company with a colleague from Buddy, as well as one of our advisors. And it was called Nomi, which was an in-store analytics platform for brick and mortar retailers. And we went through 2 fundraisers, had Greg Crofton first round co-lead our Series Seed, and then had Excel lead our A round, and then ended up selling the business right before our B round in 2014 to a company in Atlanta called Brickstream. And it was a really great journey. Got to about 40 people at our peak and had about 50 enterprise customers within those 2 years, which was pretty incredible. But I would say we were very, very sales heavy in our founding DNA. But once we sold the business, we were going to Atlanta for about a year every week with our acquiring company. And we're just really missing the hustle of the New York, startup culture. And so we started to look at other opportunities, and my co-founder, Mark, and I ended up going over to Yext actually about the same exact time. And I ended up becoming the SVP of New Business in August 2015. And that role really encompassed all of the go-to-market efforts for the company. So every single new product that the company rolled out over the next 4.5 years was something that I had to be in charge of, really being the tip of the spear and figuring out that 0 to 1, sales cycle for. And, Yext went public in 2017, and it was a great success story. And after about 4.5 years at the company, I ended up getting the early stage bug again, and having seen, an early stage like success story in terms of M&A, and then an early stage success story in terms of IPO, as well as starting a business, I felt like I'd seen the key chapters of the startup journey. And so I wanted to see what it was like on the VC side after doing some angel investing on the side here and there, but just getting a lot of energy from helping founders, figure out their own go-to-market strategies. And so that's really what led me to Correlation in January of last year. Who knew the world would change so significantly 2 months later? But the goal was to start up the New York presence, and I feel like now that the city's starting to open back up, it's been great to get out there and meet people in person again. But yeah, so this is a platform in which now I'm able to really just pay it forward. And a lot of the companies that we're able to work with through Correlation, I'm really able to dive in and help everyone think through their go-to-market strategy and really be that tip of the spear and figure out the repeatable 0 to 1 sales. So that's a very quick high level on me. I thought one of the best ways that I could help everyone think about sales is, because sales means a lot of different things in this market. It could be, depending on the product, there's a lot of different verticals. Some are regulated industries, some are product-led sales, some are, selling into consumers, some are selling into businesses. So there's a lot of different areas in which sales is thought of. So I think, without going too deep down the rabbit hole of any one of those, I think just at a broad level, it's important maybe to talk through just what I've seen to be an effective sales process, and I'll keep this very high level. But it always starts with an initial idea, and this could be something you have even before you incorporate a business. And that's something when I was at Buddy Media kicking around my own idea, I had been working on it, like on the side after work and things like that. Just really building a thesis and a hypothesis around what I thought, customers were really experiencing pain with. And that could be anything from what part of the process was broken, are there areas where no one in the landscape today was, really building a product in that category or sector? Was there a problem that you faced in your own career, prior to starting a business that you just had that itch and you wanted to solve it? So there could be a lot of reasons that you wanted to start a business. And so that was an important thing that I think a lot of people tend to do even at their current jobs before they get the courage to start a company around it. But then where we usually were doing this, and this included both when I was at a big company like Yext, but also when we were working on this at Nomi, is starting to just identify like who are the customers that could be a really interesting set of people to go after just to test out hypotheses. And this can be a mix of people and also people you don't know, because I found that with the abilities of Google surveys and other platforms like that, you can actually build a really, really interesting interview that you actually can target pretty granularly to get feedback on something that's bugging you, even without ever doing it in person or meeting people, which I thought is a pretty interesting resource now. So going through that, you can start to iterate, you get your product team to start to build out some, either it's mock-ups, it might be a workable MVP, having some basic product to match what you're hearing in the market in terms of pain points. That's what you take out to try to get your design partners, signed up to at least give you the faith that they'll try it and give you the honest feedback. That's really what you want out of a design partnership. And then from there, once you have that iterated enough to actually have a working real product that you believe can successfully solve the pain point that you're attacking, that's when you start to get into the pilot test. And the difference to me between a pilot test and a design partnership is that the pilot test has some success being a paid deal, like you actually want to get it to where you're attacking the budget that these clients have, to be able to unlock for you if this works as advertised. And so that's what then rolls into, building out that ROI story where you're able to actually say, well, if we can do what we say we're going to do, what does that mean to you? And how do we help you be a champion internally to take that and actually, align some budget with it, and so that's part of building that ROI case, usually in conjunction with your buyer internally at the company. And then as that happens, assuming that's successful, then you get to a place where, product usage starts to matter, retention becomes part of the conversation, where if they're using the product like you say they need to, and they're doing it with success, and they're pulling in more people, and you've got customer success coming in as well, then as that contract comes up, and it could be a 3-month contract, it could be a 6-month pilot, it could be anything that comes up for some extension or new agreement in place, that's when we would call it some type of retention. And then lastly, they like you enough where as you start to think about new things to sell them and new things to develop, maybe even with them, then you're expanding that account, to be either, in my case with Nomio, is a full store rollout, but then it's sprinkling new things, new SKUs onto that full store rollout. And so those are all things I think are really key components of the sales cycle. I think as you start to get through all this would ultimately go into, some type of sales playbook where, founders really should be involved at every step of these components that I've outlined, and their thoughts and their experience should be what gets cataloged into a sales playbook, even if it's bare bones to start. And once you have that, that's when I think you start to sprinkle additional resources onto your sales team. Because I think one of the key mistakes I see a lot of people make, and we made it even at Nomi pretty early, is that you get to almost like false confidence, where you kind of get either maybe you're getting into the design phase and you hear, your happy ears, right? You hear a lot of really good signs. Everyone says they love what you're doing, but they haven't shown you the checkbook yet. They haven't shown you any buy signals, but yet you take that as enough of a signal to go and hire a sales team. You feel the competitive pressure. Maybe one of your competitors just raised $100 million growth round, and so you're feeling the heat. So you then say, oh, well, we got to go hire up, like 5 experienced senior salespeople. And that's like that's the quickest way to run out of runway, is building a sales team before you need it, before you've even proven what product market fit looks like. And, so I just think that at that point, you really need to get through a methodical, repeatable funnel in order to feel the confidence to start to build out a sales team. And then once you've got the sales team starting to be able to recreate the sales process that you've created and successfully done yourself as a founder, then I think that's when marketing comes in to help drive additional awareness and create demand on top of that. So that's just more of a framework that I feel like is a great underpinning of everyone, being able to think about their own, go to market with whatever type of company that they're building. And then where I like to keep it more anecdotal is just a few experiences, because I think I had to learn a lot of this from the ground up. Like, as I said, when I started at Buddy Media, I had never been in sales in my whole career. Like my first job out of college was at William Morris, which was a talent agency in Hollywood. I was more interested in being like a director or producer then. And so I had no sales experience then. And then I ended up dabbling in a few startups in San Francisco, but more, being part of the social tech scene, not the onward and upward, people that were at Facebook and Twitter, really seeing success in the web 2.0 kind of consumer game. So when I got to Buddy, the first job I had was actually an agency development role. And so my job was to go out and get as many MSAs signed with agencies as I could. They didn't even want me to be in sales originally. It was purely just be an agency development person, go out and get as many partnerships set up with agencies as you could. It was a heavy volume game. Picked up the phone. We had a lead list that we bought from Redbook, which I found to be very effective. And I think sometimes a lot of people have no idea like where they're going to find their first set of customers. For almost any industry that you're trying to sell into, there usually are lead lists that exist. And in some cases you can get, samples of them. In some cases, even trade shows or trade organizations that are relevant to that industry that you're targeting. They often can even share lead lists or even have directories of people who've committed to being part of that organization or trade group. So I think that's a great place to start. But basically my first 3 months, I had to get, the goal I think was about 10 MSAs per month with a brand new agency. And the idea would be if you get the agency using the social platform, that then they would use it to pitch their clients and then eventually bring their clients on board for a paid agreement and paid engagement. And so I ended up getting 90 agreements in place over 3 months. And that was when they said, you have too much firepower to be just in agency development. So we're pushing you head over heels into sales. And we're going to put a quota on your head. Don't worry, it won't hurt too much. And I was scared to death. And luckily I had that agency underpinning, because that was how I ended up shaking the tree. And I realized pretty early what the value was of channel partnerships, because agencies, at least with marketing software like Buddy Media was, agencies ended up really holding a lot of value because they often controlled the budgets for, back then, if anyone remembers what those Facebook tabs were that often created, had like designed creative, and campaigns were being launched out of Facebook tabs. You could sign up for a sweepstakes, you could see a video trailer, like all that stuff was all encompassed within those Facebook pages, that existed for brands. And so by doing that, we actually helped agencies get really smart about what was possible within those Facebook tabs. And then they looked good. And so inherently, by them winning business and winning a huge retainer from their clients, they always were able to expend a part of the budget toward our software. So it definitely was like a win-win-win situation. And I've taken that agency mindset and always tried to figure out in every role I've been in ever since, who are the agencies of my industry? Because it doesn't always have to be an ad agency. It could be a partner that's selling local marketing, to SMBs. It could be a partner who's selling advertising to hospitals. It could be a partner who's going out and, there's just almost for any vertical, there's usually some type of partner play where they're selling some type of services, so it could be an Accenture, it could be a Boston Consulting Group, it could be McKinsey, it could be, almost any category has this version. So I think it's always important to think about, well, what are some of the ways that we can go out and actually get scale with our efforts by being a thought partner for some of these people who are already working with a lot of the clients that we want, So agencies became a huge force multiplier for me at Buddy Media. And then the pilot program I thought was also really important because it was interesting because we never gave the software for free. The software was free monetarily, but in order for someone to use the software to have as a demo account so they could pitch their clients, they had to sign an MSA. And while it was like a 3-page legal agreement, but what that did was when the client bought what they were selling, we didn't have to go through an extended legal procurement cycle then, because we were already papered with the agency. And so at that point, it was just simple order forms. So what took, because we all know if you have to go through legal, that adds a lot of risk and a lot of time to any sales cycle. And so by getting the sales cycle out of the way, at least on the legal front, before we ever even engaged a brand, it made it almost turnkey. So there were times where I remember with some of the WPP agencies, we ended up getting an MSA in place way early before there was a deal on the line. But then I'd get 5 order forms from various brands through WPP all within the course of 2 weeks and make like 30 grand in MRR for Buddy Media within like 2 weeks of just having one pitch with a WPP agency. So it was a very interesting tactic that I think I've tried to figure out how to apply that in new areas, but that's definitely an interesting takeaway as well. And then the last thing I'll say about the Buddy Media experience, I think the idea of becoming a true subject matter expert that makes everyone around you smarter about whatever business or product you're building, even if it doesn't have a direct sometimes impact on the transactional value in the near term, I think that's what ultimately made, even in the space in general, I think that's what made Buddy Media win in social media, at the time, as being kind of the vaunted partner of a Facebook or of a LinkedIn or of a Twitter, was that anyone could come to us and even if they didn't have an idea that directly related to a deal in the moment in time, we were always like the first call that an agency or even a brand would make when they were brainstorming about something that was possible within the Facebook platform or within Twitter. And I felt like that really was something I've thought about a lot. And I tell a lot of the founders I work with now is no matter what industry you're in, become an expert in that category way beyond just the product you're building, because a lot of people will think of you as someone that they'll ask and they'll trust you. And I think the best salespeople are often the people who can be trusted the most and don't feel like you're always saying something with a pure bias in mind, So those are some of the core takeaways I had from the Buddy experience that ended up, Buddy ended up getting bought by Salesforce for about 700 million in 2012. And it was a great outcome for a lot of people. So I think these were some of the tenets of what led to a successful sales channel there. So to flip it to a very early experience, when I joined Buddy, I was like number 35 or 36 employee. And Nomi, I was one of the first 3. And, so going from having at least a product that existed to having nothing became a way different experience. And with Nomi, I think what was really interesting and the most vivid memory I have, beside just having the ideas, we were at this coffee shop in Soho called Ground Support, and we were just always writing up like analytics dashboards on a notepad. And ultimately we got that turned into a set of mock-ups that we kept on iPads. So it was not even a working product. It was literally a flat JPEG file that had 4 core graphs. So it had, I still remember the metrics. It was foot traffic in terms of who was walking by the store. It was who out of the people walking by actually walked into the store. So we could use the difference in cell phone signals to actually measure the conversion rate of someone walking by versus actually walking in and spending time in the store. We measured dwell time, meaning how long someone actually stayed in the store upon visiting. And then we measured repeat behavior. So we actually could see based on that unique identifier on the phone, which I actually think in today's world, it's not even there anymore with the ways Apple has deprecated those IDs. But back then you could actually see what percentage of time someone came in. So if it was like a sweet green, you could see how often someone was actually visiting the sweet green. Even if you didn't know who they were personally, you could just see that same device made it in. So it gave them a sense of how often people were visiting on a regular basis. And so those were kind of the 4 hero metrics that we had in our dashboard. We took that dashboard, and I remember that we walked around for probably 6 weeks every day, hitting every single boutique in no fear, asking for the manager, showing them a demo, and signing them up to an LOI. So it wasn't even, because it wasn't a working product, it had not been built, not a single line of code had been written, but getting them to sign up an LOI that they would pay $50 a month to subscribe to this platform if it worked as advertised. And basically what we did was, when we had about 20 of those LOIs signed, that's when we started to talk to investors. And so we started to get an angel round together. And it was when, I remember still to this day, that when we had TJ Maxx was our client, like the biggest enterprise we had actually pitched on this, because we still had some relationships from Buddy and some other places. And we got an LOI from them as well to adopt the platform. Basically just, and it was totally non-binding, but it was saying, hey, if this exists and the way that they're framing the solution, if this exists, we will roll it out to our stores. And so we used all of that demand without even having a product underneath it. We used that demand to close a seed round. So it was like a really, really interesting experience of just showing demand plus sales prowess plus team plus, opportunity, market size, to get a tier 1 firm to write us a term sheet, which was pretty amazing. So that was like the truly the most kind of door to door, hard fought grind of a sales cycle I've ever been through. But I do think it's important because you just have to shake the cobwebs off and be willing to take as many no's as you can. And I remember one of our very first clients was John Fluvog, which was the crazy like shoe store. They were one of the very first people to actually, sign up. And then they were the first we actually installed our sensor into, which was kind of funny to see that how they would use it. But anyway, and then the creative contracting piece I thought was really interesting. So once we did have a product after we had raised our seed round and we started to actually get pilots off the ground, one of the things I thought was really brilliant here was we actually, instead of giving people just a 90-day pilot, which is what most people think to do initially, we actually always negotiated a 12-month agreement and then baked in a 90-day opt-out. So we said, we're going to negotiate what this looks like for your full store rollout now, and talk about price, talk about the ROI you'd see, talk about what makes sense. And then when we back it in, we'll give you 90 days to get out so that you're not feeling like you're locked in, if the product doesn't work as we say it's going to work. And so then the difference in that is that it's a lot heavier of emotion for someone to opt out for something than it is to go through a brand new procurement cycle in 3 months. So I found that to be a really, really interesting tactic that worked a lot. And I think the chances of someone pulling out after 60 days of using the product and really getting embedded with it was only about maybe 10 to 15% drop off, which was pretty amazing. So that was great. So I would definitely think about ways to use kind of creative contracting, with your own pilots and experiences you have with early partners as a way to just increase the chances of success. And then the other thing that we did at Nomi, which I thought was really impressive, and we were all very big fans of reading Mark Benioff's book, Behind the Cloud. That was one of our favorite books of how he dominated his competitors and, really built a huge marketing presence. And so one of the things we did very early was we always reached out to all of the analysts and all of the journalists in the various categories. So we were always pinging like VentureBeat and TechCrunch and, like Recode and, like even in the fashion world, like the Business of Fashion, like all of the WWD, like we found who the publications were, both broadly at our stage of business, but also we found them very, vertical specific. Like, who are those top trade pubs that we knew that every single one of our, potential prospects and clients were reading? And we made sure to get out in front of them early and just say, here's what we're doing. Here's the success we're seeing. Like, we were always banging the drum. And then anytime they had any type of trade show, at first, we actually just would go without paying for a badge, and we would just either go to the parties afterwards or just try to catch people in the hotel lobby of, where they were and where we knew the trade show was. And then as we had budget, we would, buy a pass and actually sponsor it when we needed to and things like that to get the lead lists and all that. But it was great, and that's how we really got to know a lot of the movers and shakers in the industry, and had a lot of interesting, success from just being out there and always going to in this case, all the retail trade shows and making sure that, we were putting faces to names. So I think that's always an important strategy pretty early on, just to get people excited about what you're doing, and also see like which of your competitors are there, and how are they marketing themselves, and what's their positioning, and sometimes it might feel weird if you're the only person there, because you always want to know that there's someone else gunning for the same market that you are, especially when it's an enterprise sales. But yeah, and then the other one I think that really stood out for Nomi was also pretty early on, like as soon as, and I said that was the mistake we made at Nomi, was we actually probably hired sales way too early. But one of the things I think is still a good tactic is maybe timing it better than we did, but going after cohorts and seeing who are the companies that you want to be in 4 or 5 years, who's like your top set of companies that you would strive for, and then go pick off all their salespeople. At least, and picking them off is easier said than done, but build a relationship with them. Figure out who's the VP of sales that I would want 3 years from now to run my business, to run my revenue team, and start to reach out to them. And maybe you ask them to be an advisor early on. Maybe you ask them, who's their favorite reps that are junior that are maybe looking for a new opportunity. And I remember we did this very early on with a lot of the Bazaar, like we loved Bazaar Voice. We thought they had a really great go-to-market for e-commerce. And so we went out and created relationships with, their founder, Brett Hurt, who was an early advisor of ours, as well as, a lot of their salespeople, and ended up bringing actually one of their top salespeople over to become one of the first salespeople at Yext. Her name was Snowflake Rosen, and had, she was amazing. And just but we were working the relationship with her for about a year before she joined us. So I think that's something that everyone can do, though, no matter what industry you're in. If there's an outbound sales component to the business, go out and figure out who those, what your wish list of salespeople would look like, and start building a relationship with them early, because you can unlock a lot of really interesting relationships through that. And they might even introduce you to customers of theirs, because a lot of times when they're in the space for long enough, they already know, a lot of the key buyers, because they've been dealing with them for so long, So those are some of the takeaways from Nomi. And I'm going to leave all the questions till the very end, because I left a whole section for Q&A. So I just wanted to get through these core components here to just give people enough to talk about. So after Nomi, we sold the business, joined Brickstream, who merged with us, and then ended up going over to Yext in late 2015. This was the most interesting experience I had, because it felt like both a startup as well as a big company, because I had the resources of a big company. When I joined Yext, I was around the 300th employee. So there was already like a very meaningful revenue channel. They had listings and pages, which were their two core products, and they were already industry leaders in those products. What they really hired me to do was to be the first product-oriented salesperson. And so I joined them as the SVP of New Business. And, the first product that they rolled out was this product called Zone, which was why I think they wanted my co-founder and I, was because we had been working on a beacon product at Nomi, because we were using various types of Internet of Things, sensors to measure traffic and do interesting things with people's phones. They had been working on a different type of product, but the idea was to build out a beacon-based remarketing platform, where instead of just doing anonymous analytics, which is what we were doing at Nomi, they wanted to actually get anonymous like IDs off of Apple devices, pull it into a customized lookalike audience on Facebook, and then remarket you. So if you walked into a Sephora with any of the apps in the network on your device, they could pull, through the SDK, they could pull that anonymous ID, tap it into a Facebook, like buy, and then basically buy a Sephora ad to retarget anyone who's been in a Sephora store, which was pretty creepy, But if it was happening at a big enough scale, people wouldn't really notice, because chances are they'd also already been to Sephora's website and, other channels, they could be remarketed those ways too. But it was interesting on both the attribution as well as the remarketing front. And so that was really the first product that I had to roll out there. And it started almost from the beginning, just like it did at Nomi. But we were going out, doing a lot of interviews, figuring out the ways that people would want to use this. Did attribution matter more? Did remarketing matter more? What was that experience that people wanted to have? How easy was it going to be to install these devices in their stores? How easy was it going to be to get SDKs into their own app? So there were a lot of questions that we had to figure out. And ultimately with Zone, we actually shelved it after all that. And I think that's the last point here, is that in sales, you also have to be very, very aware of what you need to see in order to consider something not a failure, but to cut it when it's time to cut it, because that's the worst thing you can do. Is the second you start to see signals that are negative, that maybe feels like there's not the market uptake, pivot before it's too late, especially when you're an early stage startup and you don't have that much runway. You've got to get to those milestones to meet the next fundraising goal, whatever it looks like. So I think that was one of the things that was really, really smart about the way we're going about it with Zone. We actually had a lot of customer uptake. Where it broke was that, one, the installing it was very laggy since there was a hardware component. And then two, the audiences that you could actually access through marketing weren't that big, and so it was one of those things, like with Facebook especially, reach was what mattered. So even if you knew the 100 people that had been in a store that you could actually identify, that wasn't a meaningful ad spend, so for anyone who was doing ad buying, it just wasn't that effective for them. And so we realized those things only after we were in market for about 4 to 6 months. But we're lucky that we had the maturity and the wherewithal to actually call it and say, you know what, this is good. We got what we needed. We're going to shelve it. Maybe we'll put it on the shelf and put it out in the world later if there's a better time, but otherwise, goodbye. And so that was the best takeaway from the Zone experience. And then, so worked back to drawing board, had some other ideas in the hopper. Reviews ended up being the one that really took off, first at my time at Yext. And so we turned that into about at this point, it's probably a 15 million ARR business. But, when I started with that product, it was the same kind of rinse and repeat, getting to know the product manager on the product, looking at the landscape. One of the products that we were looking at a lot was Medallia. We were trying to figure out, and this is, my first bullet point, deep competitive analysis to figure out what swim lane we could actually differentiate in and use assets that we already had, and so where we decided was location reviews still hadn't really been a thing yet, but yet location reviews were actually a really big input into SEO. And so we actually said, Medallia is great for surveys. It's great for getting feedback once you've bought from a store, once you've bought from a website. They handle that whole, soup to nuts survey experience and getting NPS scores and things like that. But what did not exist yet was someone who would actually use that reviews data to optimize search experience and search ranking. And so where we figured after we did a deep competitive analysis was, let's help clients capture reviews, but with the intent of highlighting those reviews on their Google and Yelp listings to maximize their search, ranking basically. And so architected that whole product, brought it out to a set cohort of food clients where reviews matter a lot because of service and taste. Did it with, service-based businesses. Like I remember one of our biggest early clients was Massage Envy, which was, relying on reviews for individual services. And so we really went after the set cohort that we thought we could get. And the second bullet point was actually really interesting because this is where being in a company like Yext, allowed us to go through these cycles much more quickly because we had 300 salespeople, so we were able to actually leverage them. But the key thing that we did not do is we never put it in their lap all of the way where they were going to get distracted from hitting their core sales targets. So my team was a very, very nimble team of 3 that we had full, comfort and anchoring from the VPs of sales across every region, territory, but we did all the selling. So all the account rep who actually managed the account would do is they would set up the meeting, and then we ran the entire meeting, did the full pitch, did the interview, did the demo, did the design partnership with these brands that were volunteering, and then brought it all the way to close. And then what was great is that because the salesperson still set up the meeting, they would get comped and get a piece of the revenue as a reward if any of their early customers were signing up for new products. So it was nice to have a little sweetener in there to motivate them too. But yeah, so that was the reviews. And then with events, the other thing we did competitively is we looked at companies like Splash. We looked at a few others that were doing event marketing. And we found that there really still wasn't a platform that was doing multi-publishing of events. So what Yext's core product was originally was doing listings management, where you could upload all of your location data into one database, and then with one click sync it to Uber, Facebook, Yelp, Google, Foursquare, Facebook, etc. We were going to try to do that with events, where if you upload an event in a moment in time at a store, at an arena, at a outside at a park, whatever it might be, any intersection of a time and a place, you could upload that into Yext and then push it out to Splash, Eventbrite, Ticketmaster, all these local calendar sites, like basically creating a one-to-many publishing platform. Events wasn't as big of a success as I'd hoped, because what we found is that no one cared enough to add incremental budget for events, because for events, the biggest budget they were already spending on was just their staff. So they just didn't really need a lot more, and they already had their own mailing list to drive events. And so they found that the public becoming aware of events was not that additive to what they were doing already. And so that was another one where within about 6 months, we actually just, we didn't shelve events because there wasn't anything that negative about it. And we were worried a little bit about the creep factor with Zone, but with events, we actually just baked it into the overall publishing platform. So we just incorporated it into the existing product to just keep differentiating against our other competitors, because none of them had an events publishing, pack, if you will. So that was a key learning from events. And then the very last one, which is still, I mean, at this point, it's probably Yext's, biggest product that they tout on their site and everything else. But the one I left, really running in January of last year was Answers, which was a structured site search product that was built on top of the entities that were in Yext's database. And the idea and what we looked at competitively there was we looked heavily at what Algolia and Solar and a lot of the unstructured search platforms were doing. And we figured out that none of them knew how to properly process NLP in a way that would come back with an entity-based result. So for example, like when you go to, like Mount Sinai's website, if you just typed in, like I have an earache, it wouldn't give you anything. It would basically give you text-based match. So it would just show you any page within Mount Sinai's website that contained the phrase, I have an earache, but it actually wouldn't give you recommended treatments for an earache. It wouldn't give you the doctors that were specialized in ears. It wouldn't give you the actual hospital locations that contained an ENT. It wouldn't. So we actually, pioneered the idea of having entity-based results that drove action, as opposed to just natural language text matching. So that was really the core product, and it took off in a pretty big way. That's about when I left. But I think just having that mental, exercise of just always trying to step back and think about what was the 0 to 1 and what were people doing today and how can you improve that. And I think one core takeaway I'll say is that when you're looking to improve something, it has to be good enough to also justify the switching costs. So it can't just be good enough to just be incrementally good. It has to be so good that they're willing to not just pay extra maybe or pay at all, but also all the internal orgs that they have to navigate to get that product adopted costs real time and effort. And so whenever you're doing something, that's why it almost has to leapfrog anything that exists now. So that's something to keep in mind when anyone's looking at developing something that maybe is just a little better than what exists today, because it has to be a lot better. But I've talked a very lot, so I am going to open it up to questions. If there aren't any, then I have some that I can go through as well, based on what a lot of the founders that I work with ask me all the time. So, but I'll stop there for a second.
Thank you so much, Wesley, for that incredible presentation, super informative. And thanks also for sharing your story of your journey in sales and throughout all the amazing companies that you've worked at, both big and small. So I guess one of the biggest questions on people's minds is just kind of, are there any ways to figure out like who your target market is? There's a lot of startups at that early stage where, they're kind of like, well, who's our target persona? Who's the target market? How do we kind of figure out and get to know, who that person is? And then also, how do you like identify people who you don't want, and filter out people who are time wasters or who pretend to be interested, but clearly are not? Like, do you develop any techniques or any kind of tips for identifying people like that so that they don't waste too much of your time? So yeah, that's one of the biggest questions I think on people's minds.
Yeah, and I do have a little of that in here. Let me I think so. Number one, I'll say just have as many conversations as possible, because I think the patterns always will emerge. And so I think really the question is, how can you get to a place, like you said, where you're saving the most time having those conversations so that you can go deeper down the rabbit hole with the people that show interest, but cut the conversations that just aren't proving to be fruitful at all. And so that's where I would say that, these are some of the ways that I've always relied on to just get to the point where I'm able to have as many conversations as possible. Because I think as long as you're listening and taking notes and, people are telling you the truth, you'll find a path pretty quickly, as long as you're able to have enough at bats to do so. And for example, there was one of our portfolio companies, I won't name, that, has said in an investor update that they had a lot of trouble because they weren't getting the volume of at bats they wanted, and so they knew that if they got the at bats, that they would be able to see some patterns emerge and figure out how to proceed accordingly. But they were having trouble, and they blamed themselves. They're like, look, we've been focused on product, like we've only been doing 2 or 3 prospect demos a week, and that's just not enough volume to see any type of patterns emerge. So I think that's really number one to me is, whatever you think your target is, use that as the core hypothesis and just go have as many conversations as you can. Like, even, I mean, for example, like when I got to correlation, I didn't quite know who our target, found, like who the right types of, founders and rounds would be, that would be a good fit for our thesis. And so what did I do? I just was like a bull in a china shop, just going out and literally having coffee and talking to anyone I could. And luckily I started at correlation 2 months before the world shut down. So I was able to do that. In New York, I was probably going to, 2 parties a night, 4 coffees a day, a ton of calls, like before Zoom was even really a big thing, like, but just literally having as many conversations as you can, taking the takeaways that you needed from each of those, and then just using it to continue to iterate. And that's the best thing I could say without being very specific to everyone's individual scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess this question is also related, which is now that we're in a time when you can't go to trade shows, when
Yeah.
everything's on Zoom. So, what are some technologies, techniques? What are some other ways of kind of getting that early stage feedback from people who maybe you have to meet through, I don't know, LinkedIn or somewhere else? But any kind of techniques during this time to help with early stage sales?
Yeah, I mean, so the one thing I will say is I do feel like trade shows have done a pretty good job of going virtual and creating, ways for their communities to still network and collaborate and get to know each other. I know that, obviously as much hype and talk as Clubhouse gets, like that is a pretty interesting channel when they do have organized things around certain topics. Another one that I really like is Upstream, which is a little more, enterprise and business focused. And they do a really good job of having a lot of scheduled talks around different categories and sectors. So I think that's always good. And I've actually gotten to know a number of people that I collaborate with on the VC side. I've gotten to know them just by listening to various podcasts and Clubhouse streams, and just hitting them up after and just saying, hey, I appreciate what you had to say. Made a lot of sense to me. Like, would love to get on a call and share notes and see how we could work together if you'd be open to it. And so, I mean, you'd be surprised how few people are brave enough to even just do that. So I think sometimes it's just having the gall to ping people, and just say, hey, I like your vibe. I like what you're saying. I like the thoughts you have about the space. I love maybe some project that you did previously. Let's chat and keep it to 15 minutes and just see if it's got to be almost like speed dating in a way. Like, you just get out what you're going to say, let them say something back, and see if there's enough interest to have another conversation.
Such a great point. And that's one thing that I am terrible at because I hate spam myself. And
Yeah.
so for me to be the spammer and to take that role, it's like my worst nightmare. And so it's just one of those things that I've just had to learn to, swallow it and get over it and just reach out. And, the worst case, I just get a no, and that's okay. Or they
Yeah.
unsubscribe from my emails or whatever it is. And that's fine, and just had to learn how to get over that and to ask for help and to ask for feedback. So yeah. I
Yeah.
guess maybe one final question before we end this is, or I don't know how much time you have, Wesley, but just one other question that's big for people is any like technologies or sales like CRMs or tools that you'd recommend to kind of keep track of leads and stuff like that. It's a question that everyone keeps asking, like, do you, subscribe to do we have the money to subscribe to Salesforce or use like
Yeah.
HubSpot or something else? I don't know if you're allowed to recommend anything, but just how do we go about finding the right tools and techniques to use?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that, for me, and I remember when, we were at Nomi, and they've done a great job. Like, I think my favorite early stage CRM is Pipedrive. I think they've done a really, really good job of creating just enough, integrations and just enough bells and whistles to make it really interesting. And I always like having kind of the list view, but also like the Kanban view of stages. And so I think they've done a great job at that. At Correlation, we use Affinity, which is more of a VC one, but I like the way they've built a really interesting product as well. I know a lot of people have been doing custom, build outs of Airtable now that they have a lot of integrations that you could do with Zapier. Everyone's got their own flavor, but I think HubSpot and Salesforce feel a little overkill if you're a very early stage company, just because one, it's super expensive, and two, you're not going to see the full value from those until you've got a lot of other systems that you're working with. And so until you need that to really integrate, it's not necessarily worth the extra cost, So that's where I'd stick to some of the lighter weight ones. And, for a long time I was using just Google Sheets as well. And I think there's enough power in that just to stay on target with what you're doing and just mapping, various funnels and tracking it through. But yeah, so those are some of the ideas.
Thanks, Wesley. And just wanted to make sure in terms of timing, I'm guessing you said you have a meeting at this time. So just wanted to make sure.
I initially needed 15 minutes to commute, but I'm actually good for about 5 more minutes if
Perfect.
any other
Okay,
questions.
so there's one other question that I got, which is any thoughts on product-led growth, which for those of you who aren't familiar, companies that kind of sell from the bottom up where the product sells itself, maybe like Slack or maybe Dropbox might be an example of that, where the product is just so compelling and so convincing that you don't need a salesperson to convince you of the product itself. And so, yeah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, and truth be told, I haven't been in any real product-led growth companies. I've always been on the top-down enterprise sales side of things. But I will say that I believe product-led growth it's here to stay for a very long time. It's a core way to understand early interest. And I think, a lot of the playbook now is that if you can build something that has utility for a single user inside of a company, then you can often use that interest and word of mouth, spreading of that product, zeal to really close a top-down sale. And I know that even Salesforce did that early on, where it had utility for a sales rep, it had utility for a sales manager. And as they all adopted the product, then Salesforce could go in and say, hey, we have 40 people at Cisco using our product at the VP level. Why don't we take all that and bring them a report to the C levels of how people are using that product, and then use that to close the enterprise deal with this company. So I do think that even product-led teams eventually, can still perform and execute an enterprise sales process. But I think in this world, where anyone can try and buy products usually pretty quickly, and it's so easy to, just see things on Product Hunt that are trending. Like, I think it has to be a part of everyone's playbook. But I think it's nice to see how that can lead into a more traditional enterprise sales cycle, which in this world, actually, it's funny because a good friend of mine is a CRO over at SalesLoft, and he was saying that nowadays it's actually really like easy to do enterprise sales because no one has to get on a plane anymore. Like with COVID, you can now do a full multi-million-dollar deal over Zoom. And when I was at Yext, I was on a plane 4 days a week for almost the entire 4 years I was there, 4+ years. And now I can't even imagine what that would look like to close multi-million-dollar deals like without ever getting on a plane. It seems insane to me, but we'll see.
Same. That's amazing. I can't believe you were on a plane that many times a week. Really
Yeah.
incredible stuff. Again, thank you so much, Leslie, for doing this workshop. I hope everyone this was helpful. We have a lot more questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to answer all of them, but thanks
Yeah.
again. So Wesley, one final question for you is actually, what's the best way for people to follow you, to connect with you? Is it Twitter or LinkedIn? I'm just curious what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, I should have put that on a slide here, but I'd say like LinkedIn, LinkedIn's great. Email Wesley at correlationvc.com. Twitter DMs are great. But and then Brella, like I'm gonna respond. I haven't responded to the Brella interest yet, but I will write back to anyone on Brella as well. So those are all good ways.
Perfect. Thank you so much again for volunteering your time today and for talking to us about everything about sales. Appreciate it again. So yeah, we're gonna, after this, we're gonna break out into the breakout rooms. So there's a breakout room tab on the side for anyone who wants to stick around and chat more about any questions people have. I saw there's a lot of investor questions that didn't get answered as well. So feel free to ask those as well in the breakout rooms, and we can have some awesome discussions amongst each other there. So again, thank you, Wesley, so much, and hope everyone has a great day ahead.
Sounds good.